My name is Vivienne Quan, and I am 31 years old. And on my wedding day, I walked down the aisle with a man I had not seen in 24 years, with a man I had been told did not want me, with a man whose letters had been intercepted and whose parental rights had been stripped by a court relying on testimony from two witnesses who were lying. I want to start with the doorway, because the doorway is where everything visible in this story happened. And I want to start there before I take you back to the beginning, because the beginning is harder, and the doorway is where it resolved. The bridal march had started. My stepfather, Gerald, was at the entrance of the venue. My half-sister, Emma, was beside him, with her arm looped through his and her head tilted the way it always tilted when she wanted to look fragile. She was going through a breakup. Someone communicated this to me in the doorway, as if a breakup was the relevant context for what was being done to me at my own wedding. My mother caught my wrist before I could move. Her grip was tighter than I expected. She said, "She is going through a breakup. Don't make this harder." I stood alone in a doorway in my dress, holding white peonies that got heavier with every second. The music was playing. People in the venue were turning to watch. My husband was at the front of the aisle. Then a man stepped forward from the edge of the corridor. I did not recognize him immediately. He was in his late 50s, silver at the temples, a dark suit that looked bought recently and carefully. He held out his arm without speaking. No explanation, no apology, just the offer, steady and quiet, like someone who had been rehearsing this specific moment for a very long time. Something in me knew before the rest of me caught up. I took his arm. When Gerald turned from the aisle and saw who was walking beside me, the blood left his face completely. The ballroom went still. The music kept playing. We walked. I want to take you back to where this started, because the doorway is the last chapter, and you need the earlier ones to understand why a man I had never consciously remembered felt like something arriving home. I need to tell you the story I was given before I tell you the story that was true, because the difference between those two things is the center of everything. The story I was given was simple. My biological father had left before I turned 2. He had been declared unfit by the courts. He had signed away his rights. He had, in every version I was given, chosen to be absent. Clean, final, delivered with the kind of calm that discourages follow-up questions. I grew up in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. My mother organized everything. My stepfather, Gerald, had a job title that sounded important at dinner parties. My half-sister Emma arrived when I was 8, and with her arrival came a recalibration I felt but was not old enough to name. Gerald smiled more. My mother laughed more. And I began to understand, without the words for it yet, that my function in the family was different from Emma's. She was loved. I was managed. I left for nursing school at 18 and never moved back. Not dramatically. It was simply obvious, the way some things are, once you have been outside long enough to see the shape of what you left. I met my husband, Bennett, in Cincinnati. He was a public defender, patient in ways that seemed almost stubborn, curious about everything, completely incapable of leaving a room without checking that everyone in it was okay. He made me feel like I did not need to perform being fine. We dated 2 years before he proposed in our kitchen on a Sunday morning. No audience, just him and a ring, and the specific quality of quiet that means someone is not going anywhere. The wedding planning was where the crack started. I asked Gerald to walk me down the aisle. He said yes, no hesitation. He said it with a glass of scotch and the look of a man who was exactly the father I had spent 31 years trying to believe I had. I built the entire ceremony around that yes. In the weeks before the wedding, Bennett would sometimes get a look on his face when we talked about my family, a careful stillness, like someone balancing something he did not want to spill. I asked what was wrong. He said, "Nothing. I just love you." I let it go. I had enough to manage. I did not know then what he was carrying. I knew my biological father's name exactly once, by accident. I was 9, going through a hall closet looking for scissors, and I found a manila envelope with a return address I did not recognize, addressed to my mother in handwriting I had never seen. Gerald came around the corner and took it from my hands in one smooth motion. He did not yell, he just looked at me and said, "That is not for you." Then he put it somewhere I never found. That night, I asked my mother who the sender was. She said, "Nobody." She said it the way you say a word you do not want to give weight to. At 14, I tried again. She sat across the kitchen table and told me my biological father had been a difficult man, that the courts had looked at everything and decided in my best interest, that Gerald was my father now and had been since I was 7, and that was what mattered. She was not cruel about it, she was closed, the way someone is when they have been practicing closing for years. I stopped asking. Here is what actually happened. My mother and Thomas Hale had been together for 3 years when I was born. He built my crib from a flat-pack kit he bought at a hardware store and spent an entire weekend assembling. He was present, consistently, by every measure, trying. When my mother met Gerald and fell in love, Thomas stayed involved. He drove across the city every Friday to pick me up without fail. He sent child support before he was legally required to. Then, Gerald pursued full legal custody. The stated grounds were that Thomas was an unfit parent. The evidence included testimony from 2 witnesses who described him as erratic, alcohol-dependent, and threatening. Those witnesses were lying. Thomas sat in that courtroom with a public defender who had 17 other cases and watched himself be painted wrong and could not stop it. He lost custody, he lost visitation, he eventually even his parental rights, stripped on testimony that had been fabricated. He stood outside the courthouse for a long time after. He had a truck, a job, a 1-bedroom apartment with a drawing I had made on the refrigerator held up by a magnet that said, "Ohio is for lovers," that he bought at a gas station because it made me laugh. He drove home. He kept the drawing. He kept all of it. He never stopped trying to find me. A letter sent in 2009 was intercepted. He wrote for years afterward. He kept copies in a shoebox. My mother found out about the false witnesses in 2006. Gerald had told her himself. He thought it would make her feel secure. She had been living with it for 20 years. 8 months before my wedding, she came to my kitchen and told me everything. She sat across from me and cried, not dramatically, steadily, the way people cry when they have held something so long the weight has become part of them. She said, "I am sorry, Vivienne. I know that is not enough." She was right. It was not enough. But it was the first true thing she had ever told me about any of it. It changed everything that came after. I did not tell Bennett right away. I was still turning it over, unsure of its shape. But he noticed I was carrying something new. He did not push. He stayed beside it with me the way he always did. What I did not know was that 6 weeks before the wedding, Bennett had met Thomas. My mother had been in contact with Thomas since the previous fall. She had told him about the wedding in February. She gave him the venue, the date, the time, and asked if he wanted to come. He said yes immediately. They did not tell me. My mother made that decision deliberately. She said later she did not know if I would allow it. She said she had watched me spend my whole life protecting myself from things that hurt, and she knew from experience that some protection is just distance wearing a different name. She was probably right. I probably would have said no, and I probably would have regretted it. The night before the wedding, Bennett held my hands and said, "There are things in motion that I think are going to be okay. I need you to trust me." I stared at him. That is the single least reassuring sentence you have ever said to me. He almost smiled. "I know, I am sorry. Just trust me." I said, "Okay," because I did trust him. I did not sleep well. The morning of, my mother brought me tea without being asked and held my hands a moment longer than necessary. She looked at me like she was memorizing something, like someone saying a long goodbye or a long hello. I could not tell which. The bridal march started. Gerald was at the entrance. Emma was beside him. My mother caught my wrist. "She is going through a breakup. Don't make this harder."
I stood in the doorway. For a moment, I was 9 years old again, holding a manila envelope, being told it was not for me. Then Thomas stepped forward. Dark suit, silver at the temples, arm extended, steady and quiet. I took his arm. We walked. My husband's face at the end of the aisle did something complicated and tender when he saw us coming. At the front, Thomas leaned close and said very quietly, "I have been trying to get here for a long time." I could not speak. I squeezed his arm. Gerald left before the reception ended. He did not say goodbye to me.
My mother sat with Thomas at a corner table during the reception for over an hour. I watched them from across the room. I did not know what they said, but she was crying, and he was nodding. And at one point, she put her hand on the table, and he covered it with his. Then it found me watching. He put his arm around my shoulders. He said, "I am sorry I kept it from you. I did not want to take the decision away from you, but I also did not know how to ask you something that big in the middle of everything else." I leaned into him. "You knew before I did." He nodded. "Your mom called me. She needed someone to help make sure he got in the door. She was not sure she could do it alone." I looked at him. "You are a very strange and very good man." He kissed my temple. "You looked beautiful walking down that aisle." Thomas and I have met 4 times since the wedding. We have coffee. We talk carefully. We are 2 people who missed 29 years and are navigating the geometry of that with honesty, if not always ease. At our second meeting, he brought a drawing in a clear sleeve and set it on the table between us without saying anything. A house with a sun in the corner, 2 stick figures in front of it, one small, one tall. The tall one had a caption in the crooked handwriting of a 4-year-old. It said, "My dad." He still had it. He had kept it in his apartment for 29 years, through the lost custody and the intercepted letters, and the court-stripped rights, and every year of trying to find a way back into a room that had been locked from the outside. He had kept a drawing made by a child who was told he had not wanted her, and he had kept it in a sleeve and brought it to a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon and set it on the table without saying anything, because the drawing said everything. I looked at it for a long time. Then I looked at him. He had my grandmother's eyes and the jawline of someone I could not place, and a way of sitting at a table like someone who has learned to be patient, because patience was the only thing that still moved. Gerald and I have not spoken since the wedding. My mother and I speak regularly now. The conversations are different from every conversation we had before October, because now they are built on what is actually true, rather than on what she had been maintaining for 30 years. That is harder and more real and worth having. I am not telling this story because it ended perfectly. I'm telling it because I spent 31 years believing a version of my life that someone else had written. And the day I finally let someone hand me something real, even in a doorway, even without warning, even while I was standing in my dress holding flowers that had gotten too heavy to hold much longer, it changed what I thought was possible. I walked down that aisle with my father, late, impossibly late. But the truth is that late is not the same as never. And the man who had been trying to reach me for 24 years was standing at the edge of a corridor with his arm out and the willingness to be told no if that was what I chose, and I did not choose that. I held on. That's the whole story. That is my story. Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.